One thing the beast system is doing is whitewashing history. Whitewashing history simply means that you deny any accomplishment by people with skin color and pretend as if behind every achievement in human history it was a white male that either initiated it or that advanced it. Why are the pagan rulers of this world doing this? When the Greek Empire was founded, or better said, after Alexander Macedonia died, we know that this Nephilim continued in the spirit realm because he's a Nephilim. He's known as Apollo or Helios. The rulers of the Greek Empire, who they ran the whole world back then, they came up with the plan that every leader worldwide, that means every dynasty of every ethnicity or every country, had to be part of their Greek cult. And that's how it was. Now, those that remained in power in the world around 200 BC and onwards, they were not all Greek, okay? In Egypt, it was a Greek dynasty that took over, the Ptolemies. That's obvious. But not everywhere it were Greeks placed on the throne. In China, you had a Chinese guy that later became the emperor of the region, and they called the region China. In ancient Korea, you had a confederacy of cities called Gaia. Now, Gaia is a Greek goddess. So what happened was that throughout the world, everyone that wanted to remain with their thrones or with their positions, they had to become an Apollonist. So they had to swear allegiance to the beast. And they had to agree that being white was a divine thing. So what happened was, for example, was that the rulers in Asia began to bleach their skin to appear white. They began to hire light-skinned workers from China, yet light-skinned Chinese people. They began to hire them, put them in positions of power. The emperors or kings used to marry light-skinned women. So that's how they agreed that the image of Apollo was superior. That was the only way they could retain their throne. So all the rulers of the world since 200 BC have been Apollonists. They have been part of this Greek cult. Now there were exceptions, okay? Those exceptions didn't last for long. That was the peace that the beast enforced on the earth. Now look, to put Apollo as the center of human civilization implies that everyone must agree that his image, a white, blonde young man with blue eyes, has to be superior. Then you need to have many of such folks around. But white people at the time, they were a scant minority. There were very few of them, and those tribes that were around were often fighting for things like access to drinking water. So the Greeks invaded Europe and they established their seat of authority in Rome, and the Greek Empire was reformed into the Roman Empire. And that's how many Germanic males from ancient Germany, that includes also ancient Scandinavia, became part of the administration of the Roman Empire. So you had a lot of tall, white males who became involved in the military, became involved in politics, economics, and this spread throughout the world. Many of those men also became ambassadors to China and to distant places. So, because the people with top positions were all white, or they bleached their skin to appear white, this hoax was enforced on the world's population that you had to be white in order to make it in life. Throughout the centuries, this hoax has been perpetrated over and over again. During the Spanish Empire, it was like this. You had the natives of the Americas, who were either brown-skinned, some even dark-skinned, because you had dark-skinned folks in the Americas, dark-skinned Indians. They were all subjected unto Spanish rule. And their leaders, who were Apollonists, agreed to this, and they also agreed to subject to the viceroys that came from Spain, and the viceroys were white. There may be one or two or three that were quote-unquote black, but most of them were white. So all those Indian tribes in the Americas, they were taught that in order for you and your people to have an advantage economically, in the here and now, you need the favor of the viceroy, who's a white man, who worships a white god called Jesus Christ. Now, Christ himself was not white, but Leonardo da Vinci painted a white Christ figure based on Cesare Borgias, who was the son of one of the popes, and the pagan rulers enforced this white Christ image worldwide. They hid the true ethnicity of the Judeans. Why did they do that? To trick people into worshipping the beast. Because the image they had of Christ was not Christ at all. It was modeled after Apollo. So they had an image who allegedly was Christ, but was not Christ. That image of Christ was based on Cesare Borgias, who was a sodomite, and Cesare Borgias was an Apollonist. So they gave an Apollonistic image of Christ, which is an Antichrist image, as the Christ. That happened through Roman Catholicism. Soon, the 12 apostles became white also. And soon even the ancient Egyptians were considered white in the 19th century. That was due to British nationalism. So that's how it went on and on and on. Whitewashing history was necessary to trick the human population into worshipping the beast. Because if they didn't do this, nobody would fall for the scam. I explained before in a previous video, the only reason why Britain went to the land of the Maoris, which today we call New Zealand, and they established their kingdom called New Zealand over there, was to have a grip on the Polynesian economy. They wanted to put a white man above the Maoris, so that throughout Polynesia, it was known that you need the approval of this white guy in order to trade with the Maoris, because the Maoris were dominant in the Polynesian region, because their islands were the biggest. Okay? The Spanish had this white supremacist thing at the top, which psychologically affected the people, but didn't went really that far. In the British Empire went really far. The British even forced many of their British peasants to migrate to their overseas territories to populate them. Because it doesn't work that well to convince the world's population that you need to be white in order to make it if there aren't that many white people around. This is why nations as Australia and New Zealand were created, to convince the world's population that the whites were superior, that whites were the majority. It is all false. It's all false. Now, this worship of Apollo, which happens through the worship of the white man as God, it will continue, but the way it's conducted is shifting. In ancient times, they had statues of those Greek gods everywhere, and also statues of Apollo, which are also called Helios or Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. They had those statues everywhere, and also the Roman governors or the Roman businessmen were often Germanic men who were tall, blue-eyed, with blonde hair. And that's how they enforced this idea on the world's population, that you need to be like Apollo in order to make it in life. Islam came up. You had the Gospel, you had the New Testament that came and all of that, but that faced a lot of resistance. Then you had Islam that came up. And Islam, you had light-skinned Arabs that eventually took over. So in there, the worship of Apollo continued, but in another way. That was more indirect because the majority of the Muslims were not white. But eventually, many of the light-skinned Arabs, they through genocide replaced the indigenous populations who were dark-skinned, and they populated the region with their own. That's why a lot of countries today that that contained light-skinned Arabs like Egypt, while Egypt used to be a black nation. Today, it's an Arab nation. You get what I'm saying? So they whitewashed the population to genocide. They did this in multiple places. Now, and while Islam was there, you also had the Europeans that came up with the transatlantic slave trade to depopulate Western Africa, which was where the tribe of Judah was located. It wasn't really the tribe of Judah back then, it became the Judean ethnicities because there were many over there. But due to the transatlantic slave trade that started in 1444, they scattered Israelites. But the transatlantic slave trade became intense in 1619. From 1444 till 1619, there were kidnappings, but it wasn't on a high intensity as it was after 1619, when the English became involved. And also the Dutch and the others. So by destroying the Judean heritage, they now could use those scammers who claimed to be Israelites, the Ashkenazi Jews, as the fake Jews who were white. Okay? And later, the pagan rulers used those fake Jews, who were really Edomites, on positions of power to convince people that you need to be this white Jew in order to make it in the world. At the same time, they used those quote-unquote white Jews as the scapegoats of everything that went wrong. They even massacred many of them. And throughout the Spanish Empire, as I mentioned before, they used the viceroys and the captain generals, who were the Marines, to enforce this idea of whiteness. In the British Empire, the same continued, but through the forced deportation, more white people spread around the earth. In the Americas, in what they call Oceania, which is Australia and Polynesia. In the 20th century, this whole thing of nationalism escalated. They regulated this with 2 world wars, and they realized they need to shift this. And that's how they turned on the white ethnicity. They came up with things like feminism, later the LGBT. This was all intended to lower the white population, because they realized that it's impossible to whitewash the whole human population. The majority of human population will always be colored. They always will be. So they realized that maintaining this hoax that whites were the majority would backfire in the long run, and if it would backfire, their whole apologist rule would collapse, and that would lead to people finding Christ. So they don't want that. So they came with multiculturalism, which is how ancient Rome was governed, multicultural with white males at the top. That's what they're bringing back now, but they want a lower white population. Because many of the whites today, they hold on to the heritage of their ancestors, which is based on a hoax. But that hoax of white supremacy, they needed to rule the world's population, but they can't have a lot of white people holding on to it, because that would lead to friction, and that would lead to exposure. So that is why you have all these issues going on in what they call white countries, which means countries in Europe and United States and Australia and New Zealand. It all intends to lower the white population, which is lowering anyway, so that they could continue their apologistic rule without challenges from white folks. Because if you tell an ethnicity that they're very special, they'll want to benefit from that special status. But what if you can't actually give them the benefits that's due to them because they're special status? In previous age, you could fool them, but in today's age, because it doesn't work like that anymore. That's why they turned on the white population to maintain their rule. Well, that's it for now. Keep agreeing with Christ and be at peace.